Children of the night, shut up! Welcome, huge movie fanatic Nate, stopping on by. This time I'm coming at you for a retro movie review. I don't know why I said that. I can simply say movie review. Coming at you this time to review the classic from, I don't know the exact year, based on the music in it and the disco, dancing, jivey, gyration stuff going on. This is late 70s, early 80s. A movie that I actually grew up with. My mom showed me in the 80s. We probably taped it off TV. She was a fan of it. I don't know how she or where she would have seen it for the very first time, maybe previously on TV. Coming at you to review Love at First Bite. Now, also having grown up with Young Frankenstein, I do want to say that I would imagine, when I watched this, I recently revisited Love at First Bite, and I gotta tell you, it was really, really fun to revisit, having grown up with it and watched it now and then when I was a kid growing up and things. And over teen years, as I became more and more interested in horror films and things, Love at First Bite kind of faded to the wayside or whatever. But having revisited it, it's really, really kind of a fun movie. And, obviously as more and more decades pass and we get further away from the era that I was born and grew up in, the 70s and the 80s, obviously I long more and more for those years of old. And watching a movie like this is, especially all these decades later, is even more special. And it's funny because I can remember watching this in maybe 86, 87, 88, whenever I would have first seen it, to record it off TV, and thinking even at that time how dated like the disco music felt. It was almost like I was a future time traveler from 2000, and it just seemed, the music seemed so much older to me than it actually was, because it wasn't actually, it was like 10 years old or something like that at the time when I saw it, but it just seemed so antiquated to even like 20 or 30 years old at the time. But anyway, that's what I can remember thinking about the disco music in this movie, watching it as a kid. But what I was starting to say in regards to Young Frankenstein is it almost seems like this movie, in a good way, takes a page out of the success of, well, I don't know if Young Frankenstein was successful, I would imagine it's possible, but takes a page out of Young Frankenstein's book, or possibly maybe a whole chapter, and in doing something that I don't know if they were inspired by Young Frankenstein or not, but whether they were or not, and having actually read some of the credits, George Hamilton, of course, plays Dracula in this movie, and he was an executive producer, which makes sense. And this was a movie that introduced me to George Hamilton. Not that I've really seen much with George Hamilton in since, really, necessarily. I mean, Godfather 3 is all I can really think of, but yeah, this is a movie that kind of introduced me to George Hamilton. Not that I'd have much more dealings with him throughout the course of my life anyway, but one thing I think is really goofy in watching this and revisiting it is just like the love interest woman. I mean, of course, it doesn't help that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of blondes, but I'm not too sure she's that ridiculously attractive. Of course, that's all, whatever, relative and in the eye of the beholder. But yeah, I mean, I think there were, I don't know, a lot more sexy, pretty women out there back then. But who the hell am I to judge? Maybe George Hamilton thought this chick was, the producers, director, whatever, thought this chick was super hot. Like, I don't really see her as being super hot, but if you don't know the story of Love at First Bite, it's kind of like, if you're familiar with Young Frankenstein, it's a little bit the same kind of a thing, where it's contemporary, whatever, late 70s, early 80s, and Dracula is still living with Renfield in his castle, but, some kind of local government kicks him out of his castle, and he's got to he flies to New York. And one thing I want to also comment on is the guy who plays Renfield. Such a good job, and he got the Dwight Fry, he. That's a bad rendition of the Renfield laugh, but he got I don't know if he's I would imagine he's parroting the Dwight Fry thing, because after all, Dwight Fry probably was the first guy in a sound movie to ever portray Renfield, I would imagine. So I would imagine this Renfield is riffing off of the Dwight Fry Renfield from the original Universal Dracula starring Bela Lugosi. But the premise of this is they're kicked out of the castle, late 70s, early 80s, and they're off to New York. And one thing that I thought was kind of funny is, you know, Dracula and Renfield have been alive for, what, I don't know, thousands of years or whatever. Is it thousands? I can't even remember. Hundreds or thousands? I don't know. One of those, you know, numbers, hundreds or thousands. It might even be thousands. Maybe is it 3,000 years? I don't know. He's been alive longer than most of us will get the chance to be, along with Renfield. And it's so funny because, you know, they've been just living in their castle and they're not necessarily aware of, you know, the things that have changed with as time goes on, and on the way to New York from wherever the hell, is this Romania or whatever? I don't know where the hell, Transylvania, wherever the hell the Dracula's castle is. He's, you know, Dracula in his coffin is reading a book, and it's all these, you know, 20s references, and he looks at the copyright and he's like, 1925, Renfield, you idiot, you know, just talking to himself in the coffin. And it's like he's trying to learn, you know, more contemporary whatever, speak or whatever, and he got a book from the 20s from Renfield or whatever. But let's face it, this movie is funny, and I think, you know, if you've seen, I don't do these videos that often, but if you've been a viewer of my channel for any amount of time, you might have heard me mention the term corporate comedy, which that's the term that I coined to refer to most of your contemporary comedy, or even back to the 90s movies, like, you know, that I absolutely despise, like Tommy Boy and these kind of successful, you know, quote-unquote comedies featuring like Saturday Night Live alumni and stuff, you know, anything like Adam Sandler. Corporate comedy is a term that I coined to give to these kind of movies where you see the same, it's like the Saturday Night Live alumni, you know, like, you know, Steve Carell, all these faces you get so tired of, Will Ferrell, all these faces you're so tired of, but they're just everywhere in these, you know, corporate comedy movies. And what I'm trying to say very long-windedly is that this is the good old days, in my opinion, before I would regard necessarily corporate comedy was a thing. Back in the good old days when a comedy actually had a soul, it didn't feel like AI generated cookie cutter bullshit kind of corporate comedy that we've frickin' seen a bazillion times with Will Ferrell and all these Saturday Night Live alumni just recycled over and over and over, and this just nasty, raunchy kind of shit humor. Like this kind of humor in this movie feels like it actually comes from the heart, or the wherever the hell you want to say, and it actually feels human and actually funny, and that's how I feel about it. But I mean, a lot of it has to do with generational thing. I understand, you know, things that you've seen when you grew up with or seen as a kid and stuff, you'll just think is better than how things are now. I mean, that's nothing new, but I just feel like things have just gotten so much worse since the frickin' 70s and the 80s in regards to, well, a lot of things, but in particular, this is a movie review channel, in particular with movies and them getting digital and just, you know, just feeling less and less human. And that's another thing, you know, because, you know, I got the Blu-ray double feature from Scream Factory recently, and that's what prompted the rewatch. And it just looks, you know, the good old film, you know, late 70s, early 80s, 35mm film just looks just so good, and it's funny. And anyway, if I can briefly describe a little bit of the hijinks that happened in this movie, there was two coffins, basically. They shipped, you know, Dracula obviously in the plane in a, you know, in a big huge box, and there was two coffins that actually came off of this airplane. Another one was this other guy, and the coffins get switched, and the other one was obviously for a funeral, and Dracula ends up at the funeral and opens the casket, and he's like, you know, whatever he says, "Good evening," and it just scares the shit out of the funeral goers and stuff. So, you know, the humor in this, I think, is really, really funny, and obviously that's what you're aiming for when you do a comedy. I don't know what the hell this is rated. I would imagine it's simply rated PG, but there's a little bit of cuss words and obviously sexual references and innuendo. I don't imagine this is rated R. I'm pretty sure the version I grew up with and recorded off TV was definitely had bits cut out, because I can remember watching this Blu-ray thinking, God, I don't remember that scene. Probably more suggestive kind of stuff. I don't know if they would have cut this stuff out when she's talking about whatever. But anyway, it's just interesting seeing this now as an adult and seeing this blonde woman, the female love interest in this movie, and just seeing how, like, I had the exact same feeling about, well, maybe not as bad as I do now, but the same kind of feeling about her when I saw it as a kid. Just like, this woman's just kind of, I guess that's the point though, that she's coarse, modern woman from the late 70s, early 80s, New York, a model, supermodel, whatever the hell you want to call her. And honestly, the way she's portrayed, I mean, I guess you can thank women's lib for this, but, or, whatever, the feminists or whatever, but the way she's portrayed is just like this single, whatever, high paid model who just sleeps around like every night, like she just, I don't know, she, obviously Dracula, I can't remember the exact, why Dracula's attracted to her so much, but, if he's had her in past lives or whatever, I don't know. It's hard for me, as you know, if you're any kind of a viewer of this channel for any amount of time, that, even though I've seen this before, it's been so long that this might as well be a first time viewing. I'm not exactly sure why he is drawn to this woman so much, but it's in the script. And it's interesting how she's just like, oh, okay, let's go back to my place or your place, and just like the casual sex era. Well, not that it's ever ended, but I'm just saying the the beginning of the swingers and the casual sex era. And just, in a way, I found it almost kind of gross how this woman is portrayed as just like, okay, well, let's have sex, and like, oh, I stopped taking the pill because of whatever, but this is a certain time of month, I should be fine for the next few days, so let's go for it. And, obviously that was, humor or whatever, and, although it is partially humorous, it was also partially like, ugh, but I guess it was just the movie's kind of way to just show how different things are compared to what he's used to or whatever. But that's what a lot of the movie is, obviously, is a play on, the old, castle days with torches and horse-drawn buggies and stuff, to now modern day, late 70s, early 80s New York. And obviously, the stuff going on when he meets like the gang towards the very beginning of, arriving at New York, and them guys are trying to get him, and the guy draws a switchblade and he like makes it go, and the blade just flops down like rubber. I mean, that I laughed, and I just was like, oh, funny. And let's face it, I mean, some of the stuff he does, like just a guy running at him and just like whoosh, whoosh the cape, and he kind of goes flying by. Like, I think the stuff is supposed to be kind of lame, and that's what makes it even funnier. Like, so that scene was fun, where he just defused this gang attack situation. And I gotta tell you, this is, for my money, a relatively entertaining movie, and the way it ends up ending, I think I won't spoil it, but is fun. Chances are maybe you can see this on TubiTV.com. If not, maybe it's somewhere on YouTube if you haven't watched it. If you're familiar with movies like Young Frankenstein, Mel Brooks' take on, making fun of stuff. This isn't Mel Brooks, fortunately, but I think it's a little more high class than your average Mel Brooks jokes. Like, for me, Mel Brooks goes a little maybe too far, and I don't know. This humor I like, I think, more than your average Mel Brooks movie. But yeah, if you haven't seen it, give it a shot if you like late 70s, early 80s stuff, and if you're any kind of fan, I guess, of George Hamilton or whatever, or if you're any kind of fan of Dracula and interested in seeing a Dracula parody that you've never really seen before. And also that other guy who plays the descendant of Van Helsing, this is the main movie I've seen him in, but he was really fun at the time too, in that great scene where he's got silver bullets through the heart. He's like, no, Van Helsing, that is a werewolf. And it's just, really? Are you sure? And it's just like, that guy is also, I almost did the whole review and completely forgot about that guy. But that's another commentary on I guess the love situation at the late 70s, early 80s, kind of kind of gross how like he's also, or he was, before Dracula came along, he was like an on and off boyfriend or whatever of this model, and also her shrink, and just a little bit of commentary on just at the time, you know, contemporary modern living or whatever. And I don't know, so the movies, at the end of the day, the movie is fun, and it was really fun to actually revisit, and I'm glad I, you know, got the Blu-ray. I haven't actually seen, maybe I'll stop on by if I feel like, obviously we have to review the other movie that's on the Scream Factory double feature, along with Love at First Bite, Once Bitten, which I've actually never seen, so since it's basically free, I will, or we will be watching that, and depending on how I feel or we feel about it, either I, myself, or Beth and I will be stopping by to possibly, like if I hate it, because I'm not a big Jim Carrey fan, if I hate it, might not review it, but if I feel like it's something worth reviewing, I expect possibly a Once Bitten review as well. But my star rating for Love at First Bite, I can probably go as high as 3.5 stars out of 4 stars. I like it that much. I think that the 90 minutes goes by relatively fast, and is just, let's face it, a lot of it is sentimentality, like seeing it as a kid and rewatching it as a kid and stuff. But I also think it's a comedy, a fun comedy from the good old days before, well, I mean, I guess maybe there was probably raunchy comedy rated R at this time as well, but one of these comedies that doesn't feel like it has to go the raunchy ass rated R route, and it can still do kind of certain kind of things without going raunchy and rated R. But I guess that pretty much does it for my review. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks so very much for watching, and as always, we'll catch you on the next video.